the easiest way to win at poker consistently is when you know what they have. From my 10 plus years as a professional poker player, today I'm going to share with you the top 7 ways that professional poker players use to read your poker hands. They pick up on simple physical and timing tells that we're going to talk about today, betting patterns as well, that a lot of amateurs still unwittingly give off all the time. When you know somebody's poker hand, it's a real easy game. Let's jump into it. All right, guys, counting down from 7 to 1, here we go. So number 7 is my all-time favorite one. The story doesn't make any sense. So I've discussed this one many times here on the channel before. This is one of the clearest ways how I can tell if I'm up against an amateur poker player or not. And basically what this boils down to is that the hand that they are representing doesn't match their range. And actually, let me define range quickly. By the way, for some of you newer poker players, your range in poker is just the range, really, of poker hands that you can have in any situation. So that is top pair, middle pair, bottom pair, a flush draw, a straight draw, or nothing at all. It is the entire gamut of hands that anyone can have in any situation. This is how we hand read in the modern era. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the example. So you raise it up with ace jack suited. That would be the ace of diamonds and the jack of diamonds in the cutoff, and a lag, which stands for loose and aggressive player type, calls you on the button. So pretty typical spot here, guys. I expect a loose and aggressive player to call me with a wide range in this situation, all sorts of good hands, all sorts of pocket pairs, suited connectors, suited aces, Broadway hands like a king queen or a king jack. I do expect them to re-raise me if they got something like pocket aces, pocket kings, but for the most part, I expect this player to call me with a wide range of speculative hands here, especially when they have position on me. As they do in this hand, they are on the button, we're in the cutoff. So by the river, the board reads the jack of spades, 7 of hearts, 6 of hearts, king of diamonds, and queen of spades. You check call the entire way versus a loose and aggressive. I actually made a video just last week talking about how this is my preferred strategy versus this particular player type because it's going to induce the most bluffs out of them. And so this is going to be an easy call here on the river. They're going to turn over their ace 8 of hearts for the missed flush draw, and let me break this hand down for you now. So we already talked about how this player is going to be playing a wide range of speculative hands, specifically hands like ace 8 of hearts. And we also discussed that if this player has the premium end of their range, like pocket aces, pocket kings, ace king, pocket queens, an ace queen, pocket jacks, hands like that, we expect to get re-raised before the flop. Since that didn't happen, we are going to discount those hands. However, by the actions that this player is taking in this hand, they are clearly trying to represent those hands. The flop came jack high, and it came with a king queen on the turn and river, which are scare cards, which should be in our range as the pre-flop raiser and not in their range as the pre-flop caller. I know that some of this stuff might be a little bit more advanced for some of you newer players, but this is how professional players put the pieces of the logical puzzle together that is poker and guess somebody's hand in a situation like this. Trust me, this gets a lot more easy with experience. But let's move on to number 6 now, and the next classic tell of how to read someone's poker hand, and that is that they are acting too quickly. So guys, I see this one all the time, especially with recreational players who I lovingly refer to as our fishy friends, the amateur players who are just splashing around. They're playing any 2 cards that look remotely pretty to them. They're not watching a video like this because they are pretty convinced that the entire game of poker is just luck and they just play the game for fun. So guys, once again, this is a classic tell, and let me give you an example. So a hand like 8-9 of hearts, for example, and the flop comes down with a 7-6-5 for the flopped straight 5-6-7-8-9. So guys, if I make a bet out here, let's just imagine we've got a hand like ace 7 here for top pair. If somebody makes an immediate raise against me here, I know that they don't have the straight here. Now, why is that the case? The reason why, guys, is because when somebody has an incredibly strong hand like a flop straight here, they're going to want to think about it. Once again, guys, this just boils down to psychology. When somebody flops a really strong hand in poker, the first thing they usually do, especially in a live game, is they look down and they double check their cards to make sure that they really got the straights. And then they're going to start thinking about how they can play this hand to get the most money out of you. They're not going to make an immediate raise without even thinking. That is instead what somebody does with a mediocre hand. Like, for for example, a pair of fives, or even as a bluff with nothing at all. So once again, guys, this is a super common tell. I see this one all the time at the poker tables. When somebody acts way too quickly, you can immediately discount extremely strong hands because they would want to take some time to think about it. All right, guys, let's move on to a super classic tell now in live poker games, and that is too much talking, false bravado. We've all seen Phil Hellmuth given the speech, and this is a classic tell, guys, of number one, a weaker poker player. Strong poker players never do this. And also, more importantly, it is basically giving the strength of your hand away. And I'm specifically talking about the situation where somebody is taunting you. You see this even in online poker, where when you're in the tank, they'll be giving it to you. Just fold your hand. Stop wasting everyone's time. You know you're just going to fold. Guys, this is somebody trying to act strong because deep down, they're actually weak. Deep down, they know they got a crappy hand and they're just praying that you fold. This is a super classic tell, guys, that when somebody is acting all big and tough at the poker tables, they're often weak. And the reverse also applies, as we're going to talk about in a few minutes here. And yeah, basically that means when they suddenly get all quiet, it's often because they have a big hand. All right, guys, let's move on to sign number 4 now, and that is a larger than normal bet sizing. So guys, I see this one all the time still, especially with amateurs, is they make a much bigger bet than normal. For example, the pot's $100. They'll just quickly bet $100 out of nowhere, often really quickly as well. We already talked about that one before, and this is almost always the sign of a weaker hand. I call this the little dog with the big bark syndrome. Basically, their idea in their head with their twisted logic is if they just make a really big bet that somehow that's going to scare you out of the pot and make you go away. Guys, never fall for this silly trick. I've seen it so many times. You want to just call with your top pair, for example. You don't want to raise because we already know that they probably have a very weak hand. All right, guys, moving on to tip number 3 now to quickly guess their poker hand, and that is when they are check raising on a paired flop. Guys, this is another classic sign of weaker poker players, and I'm going to give you an example here once again. Do not fall for this silliness. You've got pocket sevens, 2 red sevens, 7 of hearts, 7 of diamonds in middle position, and a recreational player, one of our fishy friends, calls you in the big blind. So we know that they're going to have a very wide range in a situation like this. They've already paid the big blind, so they are of course going to play an even wider range of hands, as they should, as they're getting correct pot odds. So let's keep that in mind going to the flop, which comes down with the 8 of clubs, 8 of diamonds, and 3 of hearts. So guys, this is a pretty good spot for pocket sevens. There are very few conceivable hands in their range that are ahead of us here. So you make a bet, a standard continuation bet, and they make the raise. What is going on here, guys? Well, let me tell you, this is the easiest call in the book. This is not a raise because there's a high probability that they're bluffing here, so we don't gain anything by raising, but you definitely want to make the call here, and the reason why is because there are way too many bluffs in their range. Number one, if they had a hand like an 8 here, that's the obvious scare card on this board. A hand like 9-8, for example, which flop trips. Guys, you need to ask yourself, who are we up against? That's the first thing you always want to ask yourself in any hand of poker. What player type are you up against? We are up against a recreational poker player here. By the way, if you want to know about all of the 5 major poker player types and how I suggest playing against them, I discuss that in detail in my free poker cheat sheet. This includes what hands to play, when to bluff them, when to fold, how much to make your bets, and so on. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. But let's get back to the player type here, guys. Recreational player. What do we know about recreational players? Well, we know that they love to slow play. They've all seen their favorite poker pros like Daniel Negreanu in a YouTube video pulling the old slow play in a $1 million cash game against other world-class professionals, and therefore they think that that is a good idea to do that in their small stakes games, even though they do not understand the difference between how these two games play. But that is a topic for a different video. But guys, bottom line, recreational players, they love to get tricky. They love to check when they hit a strong hand like a trips, for example. So they're not going to raise you on this board. They are going to raise you instead with all sorts of crappy hands like a pair of 3s, like a hand like pocket 4s, or most commonly some sort of bluff on this board like a hand like ace 10, for example. They will randomly bluff raise you with a hand like that. Guys, remember, there's no draws on this board. There's nothing going on, and we know that if they had an 8 here, they they're very likely to just call you and slow play their hand. So guys, once again, this is super transparent. Just make the call here. There's no point in re-raising, because the tiny percent of the time where they actually do have some sort of slow played monster, like a pocket aces, you're just going to get snap called. But the majority of the time here, they don't have anything. So there's literally no value for us to raise anyways. You just want to call here and let them keep bluffing at it. All right, guys, let's move on to tip number 2 now to quickly guess their hand. And this is my other all-time favorite, is the Hollywood raise on the river plus the speech. And this is classic Phil Hellmuth territory here. And I'm not talking about taunting here, by the way. We already talked about that earlier in the video. I am talking about here the person who is facing a bet on the river. They go into the tank, they give you a speech about how they're tired of you bluffing them and they need to take a stand and draw a line in the sand, and they pull in the big old raise after they're in the tank for 2 to 5 minutes. Guys, do not fall for this common trick. This is almost always a monster hand. Amateurs do this all the time when they pull this Oscar acceptance speech nonsense on the river. This is a slow played hand. For example, you've got 2 red aces, pocket aces on the river of 6, 7, 5, Jack, King. This is going to be a hand like 8, 9 for the flop straight. Pocket 6s for a slow played set. Pocket 7s for a slow played set. Pocket 5s for a slow played set. Pocket jacks, which hit the set on the turn. I think you guys get the idea here. Guys, do not fall for this silly ploy. This is usually something that tight, regular players like to do. They are not bluffing you in this spot where they go into the tank, they give you a speech, and then out of nowhere they shove all their chips in the pot. Just fold your 1-pair hand like pocket aces here. Believe me, they are not bluffing you. All right, guys, let's move on to my number 1 way to quickly guess their poker hand, and that is when they look you right in the eye. Guys, obviously this one applies to live poker only, and once again, this just builds off a lot of the themes we've discussed all throughout this video, that acting bold and tough at the poker table often indicates weakness, and the opposite is also true, that when somebody starts acting all timid, maybe their hands are trembling when they're reaching for their chips, that is often the sign of a monster hand. And so a lot of people will try to use this psychological trick against you by once again trying to act strong, looking you right in the eye to try to convince you that they have a really strong hand, when in reality they're weak and they're just secretly hoping that you fold. All right, guys, like and subscribe if you found this video helpful, and if you want to know my entire strategy to beat the small stakes games and the mid stakes games as well, including what hands to play, how much to bet, how much to bluff, how to read their hand every single time, make sure you grab a copy of my free poker cheat sheet. That will be the top link in the description below. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. I will catch you next time.